30 seconds, maybe a minute, to tell you about my first visit to New Hampshire. It was in January of 1996. And I was a law student, and I started working for the Bob Dole for President campaign. It was still a primary. So they came up with this brilliant idea that they were going to send a bunch of Floridians on a charter airplane to New Hampshire with oranges, hand out oranges door to door. Suffice it to say, it was a very cold day. The oranges were frozen by the time we got there. So they break us up into these walk teams. And the walk team that I'm on, about 4 of us, one of them is an older gentleman by the name of Rubio. You have no reason to remember the last name. But suffice to say, he was the chairman of the Republican National Hispanic Assembly in Florida. Humberto was a great man. He passed away a couple of years ago. He was a businessman. He got successful selling spices in a company that he ended up running at home. But he was about 5'2", mustache, dark mustache, white hair. And he was on my team. So we start walking door to door. We walk up, now he speaks very little English. So we walk up to a door, and he walks up to the door, and he presses what he believes to be the doorbell. Except it was not the doorbell, it was the garage opener. He had walked into the garage, and the garage closes behind him. So suddenly he's screaming in Spanish, "Get me out of here, I'm trapped, I'm trapped." So, moral of the story, in January of 1996, you awoke to a 5'2" Cuban screaming in your garage. That was us. But Bob Dole won. So that's the first thing we feel cleansing, but that campaign went for it. So thanks for having me back. And I'm great to be here with you as we get ready for 2016, what I believe is going to be the most important election in my lifetime, perhaps yours as well. And here's why. What we have to decide in 2016 is not about what party is going to be in the White House or who's going to control the Senate. It's not to decide what kind of bills or what laws we're going to pass. What's on the ballot in 2016 is what kind of country we want to be. Now before that, let's remember what kind of country we've been. And I come from it from a very personal point of view. You see, for almost all of human history, think about it, in the whole history of mankind, almost every person that's ever lived has lived in a society where the future was determined for them. So imagine that for a moment. Imagine growing up in a country where you are told that you can only go so far because who your parents were or were not. So if your parents were rich, if your parents were connected, if your parents were influential, you can do anything you want. But if your parents were not, then you were limited, no matter how hard you worked or how much you tried. Imagine that for a moment. Well, you see, that is not hard to imagine, because that's the way almost everyone who's ever lived has had to live. And 2 of them were my parents. My parents were born into families that were not privileged or politically connected. My father lost his mother when he was 9 years of age. He went to work, left school, went to work, and would work for the next 70 years of his life. My mother was one of 7 sisters raised by a disabled father who had contracted polio when he was young, lost the use of his leg, and he struggled to provide for his 7 girls. In fact, my mother often told us that she never went to bed hungry, but she was pretty sure her parents did. They met each other in Havana, they got married, but they couldn't get ahead. They had big dreams, they had things they wanted to achieve. My mom always wanted to be an actress. My father wanted to be a successful businessman, but for whatever reason, no matter how hard they worked or how much they tried, they didn't believe they could get ahead. And so in May of 1956, that married couple came to the one place on earth where people like them could have a chance to succeed. Their first couple of years in America were not easy. In fact, they were discouraged. In fact, they were so discouraged at one time that they actually thought about going back to Cuba for a point in time, but they decided not to, thank God. And they stayed here and they persevered. My parents never became rich. My mother never became an actress. My father never became a successful businessman. But my parents lived the American dream. Because the American dream isn't about how much money you make. And the American dream is never been about how many things you own at the end of your life. The American dream is about being able to achieve happiness by having the opportunity and the reality of achieving the kind of life you always wanted. And my parents did. And they did it working as a bartender and a maid in a hotel. Working as a bartender and a maid, my parents were able to buy a safe home in a safe and stable neighborhood. They were able to provide for their family. They were able to take us on little mini vacations to Walt Disney World and Walt Disneyland when we lived out west in Las Vegas for a few years. They were able to retire with dignity and security. And most important of all for them, they were able to leave all 4 of their children better off than themselves. All 4 of their children went off to a better life. I have a brother who's 21 years older than me. In fact, he had gone to the Army, served as a Green Beret, and had come back before I was even born. He drove my mom to the hospital. And it reminds me to thank all of you who have served our country in uniform. We should never take that for granted. And I appreciate your service very much. I have a sister that's 13 years older than me. And then when they were in their 40s, they lost their mind and had 2 more kids, me and then my sister. My parents fully lived the American dream. Why do I say this to you? Not just because I want you to know more about me. Because what my parents did has been done by millions of people throughout 230 some odd years. And our country is one of the few places in the world where that story is even possible. I believe when you're born and raised here your whole life like I've been, it's easy to take that for granted. It's easy to believe that this is the way it is everywhere, but it isn't. What we have in America is special. It is unique. Not in the world today, unique in human history. And what we're being asked to decide now is whether we want to continue to be that kind of country, or are we prepared to become just like everybody else? And we have reason to worry. First, there is no one that can argue that America today is safer or more respected on the global stage than it was just 5 years ago. Today we face multiple threats at a time when America is less trusted by its allies and less feared by its enemies. And second, you have millions of people in this country who are starting to believe that what my parents achieved is not possible for them. Now they open up the newspaper every day and it says the economy is doing better. Wall Street's having a record year. Companies are making more money than they've ever made. But they're still living paycheck to paycheck. And they're wondering, what is it going to take? When is my life going to get better? When am I going to be able to get ahead? When will I ever be able to have enough money left over after I pay my bills to put it aside for retirement, to pay for my kids' college, to afford the things I enjoy? And so we have to ask ourselves, why are these things happening and what can we do about it? On the economic front, the challenges are happening because we have undergone a rapid economic transformation. This is a permanent transformation. This is not a cyclical downturn that's going to get better. The changes that have happened to our economy are permanent. Globalization is real. First of all, it means we have more global competition than we've ever had before. We now have to compete with dozens of other countries for job creation, for innovation, for new jobs and new business. And we're trying to do so at a time where we're increasingly uncompetitive because of federal governmental policies, taxes and regulations and debt and Obamacare, and even holding back our full energy portfolio. Second, the better paying jobs of the 21st century all require a higher level of education or skill than ever before. If my parents had come here in 2006 instead of 1956, it would have been hard for them to achieve what they did working as a bartender and a maid. Because the cost of living has gone up much faster than the salaries for bartenders and maids. My dad would have had to become an electrician, or a welder, or a machinist. My mother would have had to become a dental hygienist, or a paralegal. These are real challenges that we face, but they're not insurmountable. And my proposition to you is that if we confront these challenges and embrace the opportunities of the 21st century, our future can be better than our past. As great as our past has been, our future can be even better. The first thing we have to do is become globally competitive again. We need to have federal governmental policies that allow us to compete and win in the global economy. That means a tax code that's no longer the most expensive and most complicated on the planet. That means bringing regulations under control, so they no longer make us uncompetitive or the most expensive place in the world to do business. That means a plan to bring our national debt under control so people aren't afraid to invest in our future economy. That means fully utilizing our energy portfolio, not just so that it's cheaper to live in America, but cheaper to manufacture in America again. That will allow us to attract back to our shores all of these manufacturing jobs that we lost over the last 20 years because of labor costs. Likewise, and on Obamacare, talk about a regulation that's creating uncertainty in our marketplace. That law needs to be repealed and it needs to be replaced with a law that allows every single American to buy health insurance from any company in America that will sell it to you. The kind of health insurance you want, not the kind of health insurance the government tells you you must have. If we do those things, we can become globally competitive again. We can once again become the best place in the world for someone to start a business or grow an existing business. But if I have a criticism of the Republican Party, is it usually stops right there. The Republican Party after that says, that's it, we can grow the economy, everyone else will be better off. That isn't true. We can't just stop right there. It begins with that. That's the single most important thing we can do. But that alone will not be enough. Because we also have to recognize that the higher paid jobs of the 21st century require more skills than those jobs have ever required. And the biggest problem we have in that realm is we have a higher education system that tells everyone that the only thing you can do is get a 4-year degree. So why aren't we graduating more kids from high school ready to go to work as welders and electricians and plumbers and pipe fitters and machinists? Why don't we have more vocational training? Those are good jobs. In fact, many of those jobs pay much more than some of the 4-year degree jobs do, but somehow we sabotage those jobs in America. The second reality we face is we have millions of people in this country that are in the middle of their life, their 20s, 30s, 40s, and they have children to raise. They have to work full time. But the only way they're ever going to get a raise is to acquire more skills. So think for a moment about a single mother who works for $12 an hour as a receptionist somewhere. The only way she's ever going to get a raise is to become a paralegal. But she'll tell you, how can I do that? I wake up in the morning, I feed my kids breakfast, I get them to school by 8 a.m., I'm in the office by 9, I have to work 8 or 9 hours, I have to rush to pick them up before aftercare closes, I have to bring them home, make them dinner, make sure they did their homework, put them to bed, it's 11 o'clock and I'm exhausted. When am I going to go back to school? I can't drop everything and sit in a classroom for 4 years. And that's why we need to have more competition and innovation in higher education. It can't just be the traditional 4-year model. We have to have a way to get people college credit for what they already know. If you've served in the military for 4 years and were deployed to the Middle East, you probably shouldn't be forced to take a class on Middle Eastern affairs. If you are hauling, if you're in the armed services in this country and you're trucking explosives through the broken back roads of Afghanistan, we should probably not give you a hard time about getting a license to transport eggs on the interstate highway system of the United States. If you've been working as a receptionist at a law office for 10 years, you've learned something in those 10 years, you should get college credit for that. And you should be allowed to package that learning with whatever you're capable to learn for free online, plus maybe some weekend classes, and maybe some courses you take at night on your own online, and turn that into the equivalent of a degree. But we can't today, because we have something called accreditation. And it means that you either go to a school that's accredited, and you sit in their classroom for 4 years or 2 years, or you don't get a degree. And by the way, the 4-year degree is still important. I'm not diminishing. But a 4-year degree alone is not enough anymore. You have to have one that leads to a job. And we have thousands of young people every year graduating with degrees that do not lead to jobs, but they borrow thousands of dollars to pay for it. And I know all about that. I graduated with $100,000 in student loans, which I paid off last year with my book, American Son, which is now available on paper. I never would have paid off. When I got married, me and my wife, that was the single largest expenditure we had in our budget was the student loan. Today we have over $1 trillion of student loan debt. And many of the recipients of those loans have degrees that do not make them employable in the 21st century. By the way, equipping people with the skills to succeed is not enough either. Because I would make this proposition to you. You can have all the degrees you want on the wall. If you don't have certain values, you cannot succeed. Hard work, discipline, self-control, respect for others. There is not a single person that's born with those values. Those values are taught to you. They're taught to you in strong families and in stable homes. In fact, when people tell me, you're not from privilege, I say, I am from privilege. I had the privilege of being raised by 2 parents who loved each other and who loved us, who encouraged us to dream, who taught us we could be anything we wanted to be if we worked hard, if we persevered and we had the ability. And you have far too many children in America today not growing up in environments like that. Now, there's no law we can pass to make people better parents. There's no law we can pass to make stronger families. But we certainly should not be bashful about pointing out that the moral and social well-being of our people is directly related to their economic well-being. And we should certainly not have any government policies that make family life harder, which is why we need a pro-family tax code. Which is why we need to stop punishing marriage in our safety net programs. There are safety net programs in America that you lose if you get married to the father or mother of your children. If we do these things, if we help people with what it takes to succeed in the 21st century, to acquire it for themselves, and if we become globally competitive, then the 21st century can also be an American century. There's no reason that this new century cannot be better than the one we leave behind. But I would be remiss if I didn't point out that even those two things are not enough. Because none of this even matters if we're not safe. And today the world is as dangerous as it's been in almost a century. You take a quick tour of the world to point that out. In Asia, China is beginning to act aggressively on its territorial claims. In fact, they claim they own all sorts of island chains, and if you add it all up, what it basically means is that they own the South China Sea. And that's a problem because 50% of global commerce comes through there. That's why the American Security Alliance with Japan and South Korea and the Philippines and other countries is so critical. You move over to Latin America, closer to home. We've had almost 2 decades of democratic progress. It wasn't that long ago when most of the Western Hemisphere was governed by strongmen and dictators. And then you see democracy sprout up everywhere. And in the last 10 years, it's begun to erode. And you may say, well, how does that matter to us? I can tell you how it matters in real terms. In the last 15 years, we've had one, not two, but several migratory crises as a result of governmental instability in Central America. Then you go to Eastern Europe, and you see Russia acting aggressively on its illegitimate claims, and a president unwilling to even arm the Ukrainian people to defend themselves. And then you go to the Middle East, which is as unstable as it's been in a very long time. First, you have Iran's nuclear ambition, which poses a grave risk to Israel and ultimately to the world. Then you have non-state actors like ISIS and Al-Qaeda and Al-Nusra and Boko Haram and all sorts of other radical jihadist groups who basically believe that it is their job to either convert you or kill you, and increasingly have the capability to kill. And you understand that American leadership is critical on the global stage. America cannot solve all these problems on its own, nor should it try. America should not be involved in every global conflict, nor should it try. But if you go through all these major challenges that we face as a nation and as a world, none of them can be solved without some American leadership. There is still no replacement for America on the global stage. The UN cannot do it. NATO does not exist without America. Russia and China are not interested. There's only one nation capable of convening the freedom and peace-loving people of the world to take action, and that's ours. What we won't, as long as we're governed by a president who believes America is often the cause of these problems, not the cure to these problems. That's a real challenge that we face as well. Because you and I are 5% of the world's population. There's only so much prosperity we can create for each other, only selling to each other. We want there to be millions of people around the world that can afford to buy the things we make, the products we sell, the services we offer. But they can't without global stability. And prosperity is not possible without that stability. And that stability will not happen without a strong America, backed up by the strongest military in the world, which we will not have for long if we continue to eviscerate our defense spending in this country. So these are the challenges before us, but these are also the opportunities. And they're extraordinary opportunities. If we take advantage of them, you and I have the opportunity to leave our children and our grandchildren off as the most prosperous Americans that have ever lived. And if we fail, then we'll forever be known as the first generation of Americans to leave the next war zone. That's the choice before us. But before we feel bad about it, we should remind ourselves that every generation before us was asked to make the exact same choice. Different challenges for sure, different opportunities, but every single generation before us had to choose to be special. This didn't happen automatically, and it didn't happen on its own. And now our time has come to make the same choice. But to make it requires us to turn the page on yesterday. To realize that the ideas of the 21st century, many of them don't work in the 21st. That no matter how much money you pour into the existing higher education system, it's no longer responsive to 21st century realities. That you can no longer raise taxes and increase regulation with impunity, thinking we're the only show in town, in a time when there are now dozens of economies out there competing with us. And that the world has not become so stable that American leadership is no longer necessary. We have to turn the page, because the 21st century faces real challenges, but also presents extraordinary opportunities for us. And I'll just close by saying to you that to me this is deeply personal, as I said at the outset. You know, this country represented by this flag, this country doesn't owe me anything. America doesn't owe me anything. America doesn't owe any of us anything. But I, for one, can tell you I owe America everything. There is... When I speak at these events, especially at hotels, oftentimes there's one of those little portable bars in the back of the room and it doesn't have donuts and a bottle of water. And every time I see that, I see the bartender, it reminds me of my father. My father worked for decades behind a bar like that. He worked on days I know he didn't want to go to work. He worked on nights that he wished he was home instead. He spent a lot of New Year's Eve behind a bar like that instead of with his family. He worked that way until the 70s. But I'm reminded that my father's, that was great work and he loved it. He was grateful for it, but that's not what he wanted for us. And he worked all those years behind a bar like that. So one day his son, his daughter, had the opportunity to stand in front of a room like this. And the journey from behind that bar so many years ago to where I stand today, that is the essence of the American dream. That he was able to make that journey is what makes it special. And whether or not that journey is still possible is what will determine whether we're still special. And I believe not only can it still be possible, but if we do the right things, we can make it possible for more people than ever before. That's why I thank God every night that I'm alive right here, right now, at this time in our history. To be part of that generation that doesn't just restore the American dream, but expands it to reach more people than ever before. And if we do this, then we'll be able to leave for our children what our parents left for us. The single most exceptional nation that man has ever known. So I thank you for being here with me today, and I look forward to answering your questions on these topics and many more. Thank you very much.
GrokTV.